Welcome, everyone. Good evening. My name is Melissa Kane, and I'm the Vice President of BigTentUSA. And I'm truly honored to be hosting this evening's conversation between Senator Tammy Duckworth and Vet Voice Foundation CEO Janessa Goldbeck about the growing list of urgent threats that are facing our national security, our democratic institutions, and our veterans. If you're like me, I'm reeling, not only from the last week, but from the last 8 months of the consistent and not so subtle chipping away of our democratic institutions and intensifying of violent rhetoric. Our government and our country right now feel almost unrecognizable, and BigTentUSA remains steadfast in our commitment to defending our democratic values, our Constitution, and the rule of law. And we do this by empowering with facts, guidance, and calls to action, so that we can all become stronger and more effective advocates and resistors. Hello, welcome, Senator Duckworth. Welcome, Janessa Goldbeck. It's really an honor to have you both with us. Before we dive into these very urgent topics and the many questions that I have for you from our community, I wanted to thank both of you for your incredible service, your service to and sacrifices made for our country in your roles in the armed forces and also in the work that you're leading today. And I wanted to ask, because I really can't imagine what it would feel like, how does it feel to be a veteran in America today? So I'll start with you, Senator.
Under threat, right? We have a president who's fired more veterans than any other president in living history, and probably ever. I mean, within the first couple of months, a Doge fired, 6,000 veterans from their federal jobs, and they have reaffirmed that they want to eventually fire 83,000 employees at the VA. So I feel that my benefits at my VA is also under attack, and then just the ache in my heart for what's happening at the Department of Defense. They're politicizing the leadership, they're purging experts, they're eroding the professionalism, all the things that uphold the greatest military on the face of the earth. They're hollowing it out. And so really sad and under attack.
And as you're saying this, I'm remembering that at this point, no women, I believe, hold 4-star general or admiral positions in active military forces because of recent firings, which is, it says a lot.
Yeah.
Terrible. Janessa, welcome. I don't know if you have any thoughts you'd like to share on that.
Yeah, I served as a Marine Corps officer. I came in right, I signed my contract under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was formally repealed while I was at boot camp, officer candidate school in Quantico. So I was actually able to serve in the first wave of officers who could serve openly. I was part of the first class of women who challenged the combat exclusion policy, which prevented us from having certain jobs in the military. And during the time of my service, saw that policy repealed so that all people who are qualified to do jobs could compete for them and serve in them honorably. And so to see long settled debates where we know women have served honorably in positions, we know that LGBTQ and trans people have served honorably, and that to see those issues relitigated, to see people being treated with such disdain and their careers ended because they're people of color or they're women or they're trans. I feel a deep sense of sorrow for everyone serving right now that is having to live through this moment, and also a sense of sorrow for the military who are being deployed into the streets, National Guardsmen and women who raise their right hand to serve and protect their communities, to defend the Constitution and respond to wildfires and things like that, and are now being asked to police their own neighborhoods. This is not what the military is for. This is not what the military is about. And I really feel that this administration is doing generational harm, obviously to our democracy, but to the professionalism and morale of our fighting forces.
Yeah, I think, we can see it outside of the military, but really understanding how it affects, all of our service members, not only, active, but veterans. Senator Duckworth, can you speak a little bit more to your thoughts on the deployment of the National Guard in our cities? I mean, obviously, we know about your reaction to potential, ICE actions in Illinois and National Guard. So would love to hear a little more about your thoughts.
Well, first and foremost, it's illegal and unconstitutional what Donald Trump is doing. He's repeatedly misused our nation's military for his own partisan benefit. And I mean, whether that's throwing a multi-million-dollar birthday parade for himself or sending in members of the National Guard or Marines to basically police fellow Americans, it undermines readiness and our national security. But he's also basically testing the limits of how he can misuse our military against American people. This is what dictators do, right? To destroy democracies and to consolidate their own power. And everyone's freedoms is at risk if he succeeds. And so the fact that he couldn't activate the Illinois National Guard and that he didn't coordinate with the Chicago Police Department, but instead went to Texas and activated the Texas National Guard to attempt to send them into Illinois is problematic. And frankly, I'm glad that he's backed off from that, and we were able to push back pretty hard on it. But now he's looking to send them into Memphis, into Tennessee, which is very interesting because the governor of Tennessee thinks it's a great idea. And I'm like, well, then bring them up on state active duty and have them help your local police force. But to send in National Guard troops without the support of the local law enforcement, without coordination, and to send them onto the streets to carry weapons and harass their fellow citizens is basically a complete abuse of power by this president and an abuse of our military and the men and women who serve honorably.
And
Yeah,
I think where this is all leading, the president has and this administration have launched so many attacks on our system of elections. We've heard them, all of the things that House Republicans in Congress are trying to do to undermine the Voting Rights Act, the things the president has said in executive order to make it harder to vote, with a specific target really on overseas military ballots and veterans who vote absentee because they're disabled, or active duty military families who are stationed in other states other than where their home of record is. They've really centered on veterans and military ballots. And they've also said over and over again that there will be fraud. They already know there's fraud. They said in 2024 there was fraud. Then when he won the election, that fraud went away. Those lawsuits challenged. But Vet Voice Foundation, we are right now fighting in court across the country efforts that the Republicans have to try to roll back ballot receipt deadlines. So your ballot has to be received by Election Day instead of postmarked by Election Day. They're trying to change the rules for how overseas military ballots that might have a signature missing, or the signature doesn't match the driver's license. They're trying to get rid of those policies that would allow election officials to validate those ballots so they can toss them, just like they tried to do in the North Carolina State Supreme Court race that was only settled a few months ago. And the president has said, there might be a national emergency about voting fraud, and therefore we'll see the National Guard in the streets around the elections. That's where my head is going. That's where we're very concerned that he's taking this, that all of this is an effort to desensitize the American public to the idea of troops in the streets as a mechanism for stealing the election, or at least very suppressing turnout and keeping people away from the ballot box and our fundamental right as U.S. citizens.
That's what he's doing. He's normalizing this. And so he's getting us used to seeing, first he got, troops in LA, then he sent Marines into LA, then he sent National Guard into DC. He's normalizing seeing troops and military equipment on the streets of our cities. And so in 18 months, when the elections roll around, people will just not show up to vote.
We can go in a lot of different directions here, but Janessa, what sort of surprises me is the focus on veterans voting, because it seems like a lot of vets voted for Trump, and it seems like we need to get the message across that Democrats are really the ones working to provide for them. And I'd love to understand how both of you think this can happen. What are we messaging wrong? How do we get vets to vote against Trump?
Certainly. Well, I think, first of all, it's important to understand that the veteran community is not monolithic. We have an increasingly diverse group of veterans, more women, more people of color, more LGBTQ folks than ever before. And that, veterans did vote 60-40 for Trump in this past election, but 40% is not an insignificant number of folks. So let's not paint everyone with one broad brush. And veterans have shifted and swung pretty dramatically between 2012 and 2024. When Biden was first elected, the percentage of veterans that shifted over to Biden from the previous election from 2016 was one of the biggest demographic shifts. So it's a very gettable demographic. There's a lot of folks who consider themselves independent, and it's reflective of our broader American society, where people do, they vote, they split their ticket, they vote for one party at the top of the ticket, and they vote another party down ballot. And the fact of the matter is that veterans are concerned about many of the same things that most that civilians are concerned about: the cost of living, how they're going to put food on the table, how they're going to give health care to their friends and family. And one of the things that we absolutely can't do is ignore vets and military families in our outreach as Democrats. For a very long time, the Democratic Party, really didn't speak to vets and military families. Vet Voice Foundation is the nonpartisan 501c3 arm of a group called Vote Vets that works to elect people like Senator Duckworth to office and ensure that she stays there and is able to grow the coalition of Democrats who served wearing the uniform, who can bring that experience to Congress and really highlight the harms this administration is doing to veterans, whether it's gutting the VA or privatizing our health care, or getting rid of benefits for active duty service members to have child care and access to food when they live in really expensive places. So we need to make sure that we're not painting all veterans with a brush and saying, well, never mind, these people are off the table, and really communicate what it is that Democrats stand for and what we're fighting for and what the Trump administration is doing to take those benefits away.
Right. We're not trying to swing 60% of the veteran vote, right? We need to swing 20% of the veteran vote, and that 20% was already very swingy to begin with. And the other thing that we need to communicate to people, and I think they're getting the message because they're showing up at these town halls. I've actually been doing town halls all across Illinois, but I've been going into Missouri and Iowa to do town halls because my Republican colleagues across the Mississippi River are canceling their town halls. And so when they cancel their town halls, I show up to do them. And as you've seen at these town halls where Republicans have tried to hold them and people are coming up and really protesting them, a lot of them have been veterans saying, you're taking away my veterans benefits. What are you doing? Why are you firing veterans? And so, in fact, many of the voices that are leading the pushback against Republicans in town halls, in Republican districts and Republican states, have been led by veterans who voted for these individuals who are now just rubber stamping and being, co-conspirators with Donald Trump in ripping away veterans benefits and shutting down VA hospitals and firing veterans from their jobs.
And can I just say, just as a citizen, Senator, how badass it is that you're doing that you're going across state lines to actually show some real leadership, because people are so desperate and hungry for real leadership, not this political posturing and this sort of like Twitter version of politics. So it really means a lot to me. I'm sure the entire audience that you're doing that. And I think
I'm looking at the chat. People want you all over the country.
I'll come. People deserve answers. People deserve
Absolutely.
answers, and I'll come. Tell me, and I'll show up. I'm gonna do a whole bunch in Ohio, I think, as well.
Right.
Amazing. But you bring up I was just going to
go ahead.
Melissa, which is, the fact that veterans are, the face of a lot of this anger in town halls. And I think that's really important for candidates who are running for office right now and for elected officials to really zero in on, because veterans are one of the last groups in our society that have cross-partisan respect and appeal. They really can break through, not just with the veteran and military community, but with the population writ large. So when we talk about that 20% of voters that we need to persuade that Democrats are better on the issues, that we are standing up for democracy, standing up for your rights in your pocketbook, that having veteran messengers on that point is really important. And I hope that gets underscored for sure.
You're both talking about, obviously, and these terrible reductions in benefits to veterans and staffing shortages at VA hospitals that are obviously fueling a lot of this anger. What can we do about that right now? Is there anything we can do about it?
It's less the staffing that we can do something about with the messaging, because that I'm working on in Congress.
Right.
What I think is more insidious is their attempts to privatize VA. And so what we need to do is to get the message out, because on the surface, it sounds really good. Hey, we'll just give you an ID card and you go to whatever doctor you want and you don't have to go to your VA for care and the government will pay for it, right? We're going to allow you to go out there and get whatever care you want. That sounds really good, especially to veterans who may have to travel quite a distance. I know, that's adorable.
Charlie.
If you have to, people want the ease of going to their nearby facilities. But what we have to communicate to people is that we need to keep the VAs there. The VA needs to be a medical center home because the VA knows about all the health conditions that a veteran may suffer from. So that if a veteran shows up and they have well, a veteran in their 70s shows up and has prostate cancer, for example. If he goes to his local doctor, he'll get great care for that prostate cancer. But if he shows up at VA, VA will be like, "Oh, you're a Vietnam veteran. Men who were in Vietnam have 5 times the rate of prostate cancer as the general population. Let's now check you for all of the other health conditions that are associated with Agent Orange exposure." Similarly with burn pit veterans, right? And Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, you're seeing huge numbers of neurological disorders, ALS, Parkinson's disease showing up. But those veterans, I suspect, are going to also have a lot of lung cancers show up. So you got to have VA there to be your medical center home to monitor. And then if you want your prostate cancer taken care of by your local cancer hospital, that's fine. You can go there for care, but at least have VA be monitoring, because then VA can take care of the whole of you and be there for you. And so what is really more insidious is this shifting of dollars that Congress appropriated to VA from veterans health care, from the hospitals out to whatever else that they're trying to do, and sending it out to, there's a Mar-a-Lago crowd of folks who are not even doctors who are advising
Right.
Trump, and have been since the first administration, who are pushing very hard for privatization. But it's really a way to dismantle VA, and we have to fight
Sure.
that.
We do.
let's-
And well, there's a question that we've been getting. I have a couple of questions from people who are experiencing exactly what you're talking about. And while we're fighting it, I think the question is, as also the research into the relationships that you're talking about between, exposure during combat and illnesses now, as that funding is drying up as well.
Yes.
What is it that we can do, and the benefits being defunded? How can we give caregivers and families the information and support they need? And maybe that's really a question for Janessa, as you're fighting in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, I think really telling the story is very important, especially to folks who, might not agree with you on other issues, but just looking at the facts. So we know that when you privatize healthcare, outcomes go down for veterans and the cost goes up to taxpayers. So there is no efficiency argument to be made here. We also know that the VA, like when you send people out into private healthcare, that means it's not like zero sum. It's not like there's just millions of appointments out there available for everybody. If you're taking a rural veteran who used to be able to get their healthcare at a VA and now sending them out in town, now they're taking up an appointment from a very limited source of potential appointments for a specialist or a therapist or something that somebody else who isn't a veteran might need. So the healthcare system gets even more clogged for folks who are outside of the veterans space. And then one other point, I'm a VA patient myself. That's where I get my healthcare. I'm so fortunate. It's the best healthcare I've ever had. And at least it has been. And when I go into the VA now for my healthcare, I always wear my hat, what says, Vote Vets or Vet Voice Foundation. And the doctors and nurses know what that is. They know that there are advocates out there who are pushing and really making this case. And I've had the experience of doctors and nurses pull me aside with tears, literally tears in their eyes, scared about their jobs. They want information. What are we doing in DC? What are members of Congress doing in DC to push back? These are people, many of them who are themselves veterans, who have taken on second service to serve their, fellow brothers and sisters in arms, who are coming in to get their health care, who are waking up at night in a panic about whether or not they're going to have a job, whether or not the type of healthcare they practice will be eliminated because it's considered woke to treat women veterans as women veterans. It's just like multiple layers of harm that this administration is doing to veterans and people who care for them.
Yeah.
I'd love to switch direction for a minute. A question that we've been getting over and over is, and I'd really love to understand, how do we remind our active duty military of the oath that they took allegiance uh, to the Constitution, versus an allegiance to this president? Someone just asked, how do members of the military reconcile that oath when the commander in chief is asking them to do illegal acts?
Well, I gotta say that I think that the vast majority of our nation's military adhere to the oath and uphold the professionalism of the military, and that is part of what is taught throughout your military career, from the day you show up at boot camp all the way through to you go to advanced education as you move forward in your careers. Part of that is my job in holding the Secretary of Defense accountable and making sure that I pushed back as much as I can on the illegal moves. But that a lot of it is also lawsuits and pushing back as well. I will tell you, though, that our military leaders are doing the best that they can to uphold those standards. And I to this day have not had difficulty speaking with the uniformed leaders of the DoD in terms of questioning whether or not they are going to uphold their oath of office. It's more the appointed leaders and the wannabe appointed leaders who can't answer basic questions that I ask in a confirmation process, like, will you reject any illegal or unconstitutional orders? And they can't answer that. But I will tell you that not a single uniform officer has had difficulty answering that question when I've asked them. So I have real trust in our nation's military. Now, the stuff that you see where, you saw Donald Trump having rallies on military bases, and you've got folks
Right.
who are cheering him on. I mean, those were young
And his
and dumb.
parade.
Well, I don't think they willingly wanted to be in that parade, right? That
Yeah.
was exploiting them.
Yeah.
But the rally, those guys shouting, and I mean that was a political effort on their part, and there's a lot of young dumb folks behind them, and that's one of those things where the military, the NCO Corps and the Officer Corps needs to come back in and say that was inappropriate. You can't do that. But we also have to pursue with the lawsuits as well.
Yeah, I get this question all the time about, when is the military going to stand up to Trump? And I think it's really important to underscore that there are a lot of lawful but awful orders that the president has the authority to execute. And right now, there are tons of lawsuits all over the country, in DC and California, the Ninth Circuit, challenging the rationale for deploying the National Guard to California. That Voice Foundation is involved in a lot of those lawsuits, providing expert witness testimony, retired generals, writing amicus briefs, etc. But, while the courts sort those out, the president does have wide authority, based on in the executive branch, to deploy the military domestically. Now, it's a huge break in norms. It's not good for readiness. It's bad for morale. But we don't want to be in a situation in this country where your rank and file Lance Corporal is going, well, maybe I don't like the politics of the president, so I'm going to refuse that order. That is in essence leads to a military coup, and most democracies, if you're a student of history, do not recover well or quickly from a military coup. So I think the question is, like the senator, I have so much faith in the men and women in uniform, but the question is really, what are we doing to highlight the really horrendous political, norm-shattering, and unconstitutional positions that this administration is putting our uniformed military in, and how will we peacefully protest and show that we disagree with this without inviting more pretext for militarization, which is what the president wants. He wants to deploy the Guard into Chicago for there to be a violent protest, so that he has more reason to send more military troops in and to grab more power using his executive authority. And so I think that's really important for all of us who are in the streets on the weekends, participating in No Kings protests and others, to really ensure that we understand the Guard is not there on their own volition. They have been sent there by a president who doesn't care at all about peace and order or stopping crime, but wants to invite more violence and to really put our folks in uniform in harm's way.
And he doesn't care about those troops that are being deployed to our streets. Let's make it clear. I mean, he just announced that he's going to extend the deployment of the National Guard in DC all the way into December. You have to understand, these folks are going to become more and more disappointed because they want to be doing their jobs. And if they're going to be deployed away from home, they want to be deployed from home fighting terrorists and fighting our enemies, right? And so you're going to see within the rank people talk about, this is not the right use for us. I should be, I should be training, if you're a Marine, you're for an amphibious assault, and so people are going to start to see that themselves within the military, even the young folks who are, those lance corporals, those speedy fours in the Army. So you're going to see the dissatisfaction grow within them. Like, what am I doing here? And so you're not going to see, while they're going to follow their orders, they're going to do what they need to do. I think you're going to see more and more members of the military recognize, especially at the younger levels, that, this is a misuse of them and their resources. And, this is really sad, because Marines should be doing what Marines do, not walking around picking up garbage. I mean, unless
Absolutely.
they've pissed off a sergeant somewhere.
Yeah,
then-
I was just gonna
My
say.
my daughter lives in Washington and in DC, and she's told me walking by,
Yeah.
the monuments and seeing National Guard looking absolutely miserable to be there.
Yeah.
It's really a waste. It's very sad.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was gonna, and to be honest, like many of them, their actual jobs at home when they're not in uniform as National Guardsmen they're police officers, they're firefighters, they're nurses, they're teachers. So we're taking these people, not only is this an enormous expense to taxpayers to have them there, to put them up, to feed them, to give them their daily stipend, but we're also taking them out of their communities. We're taking resources out of their communities that are actually public safety resources and things that make communities stronger, let alone the toll on their families and their kids and all of that. For what? For a political stunt so the president can feel like an authoritarian.
Yeah. And by the way, it's $1 million a day for each one of these deployments on average.
Crazy.
Great question coming in. Do you know if the military has seen a decrease in members not renewing their contracts or fewer wanting to join in the past several months? Any way
Yeah.
to gauge
I think
that?
it's probably too soon to see that right now.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, and the economy is not exactly humming. People are
Right.
still hurting, prices are still up. There's a lot of reasons people join the military. There's a big, misperception that everybody joins because they, need the money. But a lot of people do, because it is a stable job that provides healthcare and housing, which are very hard to get in America today. So I don't think we'll necessarily see that impact on recruiting and retention for a while. But when you look at leadership, at least for retention, we're seeing the complete purging of the ranks of people
Right.
who are not deemed sufficiently loyal or considered, too woke to serve in the Department of Defense.
Sure. And you mentioned that Trump is doing quite a lot of this legally. I want to talk about how Congress is aiding and abetting through this big, beautiful bill, an increase in ICE funding for 10,000 additional officers. I'd love your thoughts on what this really means for our public safety and for our national priorities. I mean, a lot of people say, this is just the creation of a private army to do the administration's bidding. Is that possible?
Well, I mean, the other thing that's happening, in addition to them taking money away from DOD and trying and moving it towards DHS and ICE, and they're going out there and recruiting young folks into ICE, offering them six-figure salaries to go be ICE agents, and basically trying to attract them with this very SWAT team macho, baloney stuff. The other thing that is also happening that to me is in many ways more scary is that they're writing the new NDS, National Defense Strategy, which lays out the strategy for our nation's military and where we're going to be in the world. And they are going to depress the importance of our role in the Indo-Pacific, for example, where we have our greatest near-peer adversary of the PRC, and they're going to say that we need to deploy troops to the border. And so they've already said that that's going to take priority over the international mission. And really, it's not the military's job to be standing guard at the border. And so that to me is much, in many ways, scarier because it is a fundamental posturing of our nation's military. And the NDS is something that they're actively working on right now. And so we're going to push back from Congress on what they're trying to do there.
And that's such an important point, Senator, because, I think folks who maybe aren't familiar with the Guard as well, might not understand that the Guard is, for the last 20 years, as you know, the US has been at war in the Middle East and supporting missions all across the globe. The Guard is rotating in as part of our operational force posture overseas. You know, there are many people in the Guard who've served multiple tours in combat or on overseas deployments. And it's not like we have this unlimited supply of National Guard that we could just keep adding to or taking from. We're actually, you know, not only are they trying to reorient our number one threats from our near peer adversaries, but to the border, but they're also taking away operational troops that we have to actually go and fight our enemies and defend our homeland. So I just imagine a Democratic president doing that, the outrage that we would have heard from the right. Like, now, what are Republicans in Congress doing? They're just going along with it. Like, this makes a lot of sense when no Republican or Democratic administration, intelligence agency, or any assessment has ever said, like, that is the number one threat to America is our border. Like, it is complete lunacy.
Right. And even if it were, that's not the military's job, right?
Right.
That's why President Bush created the Department of Homeland Security. That's why they're there. And so, you know, if they truly care about law enforcement and all that, then they would, you know, they would return the almost $1 billion that they diverted from law enforcement grants, and put that money back into law enforcement grants, crime prevention, violence prevention, child protective services, police officer training, all of that money that Congress actually appropriated to help with law enforcement. Heck, we had a bipartisan deal that was negotiated with a very conservative Republican at the end of last year that included doubling the number of Border Patrol agents that Democrats were ready to vote for. And Donald Trump at the very last minute said, don't do it, because Elon Musk said, don't do it. And here we are. So we simply have to continue to push back. And again, what they're doing is trying to normalize and trying to change the way we do things, and we just can't let that happen. And that means that we have to go out there within our communities and talk about how not normal this is.
What does pushing back in Congress look like? I mean, obviously the Republican Congress and the Supreme Court, they're completely abdicating their roles. When you say we're pushing back in Congress, what does that look like?
Well, it may look like a government shutdown coming up. We have said to our Republican colleagues some of the things that Democrats are going to fight for. Now, it's not going to it's going to be on healthcare. The biggest fight is, if you want to continue working on the budget and to pass a budget, then you need to reinstate the Medicaid, agree not to touch Medicare, and agree not to continue to basically misuse doing pocket rescissions. And so you may see a government shutdown that Republicans will force on the American people because they're not willing to be bipartisan.
I've also seen a number of members of Congress in the House and the Senate, we're in the minority in both chambers, but they do have the ability to call spotlight forums to really shine a light on these issues, to say, to bring reporters into the room, to bring influencers and social media folks to the Hill to actually hear some of the things we're talking about. Because I'm seeing in the chat, people are saying $1 million a day. Why isn't that communicated everywhere? That's the type of thing that we need to get that out into public consciousness. We don't live in a world anymore where you can just turn on the nightly news and we all hear the same facts. So I've been inspired by the members of Congress who are taking the initiative to put together forums and press conferences and things that draw media in, whether it's social media or traditional media, to really bring a spotlight to some of these issues.
Yeah. That $1 million a day was just for LA. That's not even counting what it costs the Marines, what it also has been costing in DC.
I think it's great that, Janessa, you're talking about some members of Congress spotlighting, and yet you've got Pete Hegseth, who has been able to make all of these drastic changes, what we're calling it the Department of War. I think people would love your thoughts on that, Senator Duckworth. But I mean, he's done a lot without very much oversight at all. So how is that even possible? Because that there are people who know who he is.
My Republican colleagues that actually, number one, confirmed him, right? Joni Ernst came out. Joni Ernst, who fought against and revolutionized how we deal with military sexual trauma, and did a lot of good after 10 years of working on it, turned on a dime when she got the call from Elon Musk. We call it the Elon Musk call. You got a call and Elon Musk says, I will run $100 million against you and you will lose your primary. And she turned on a dime and voted for him. And once she voted for him, all the other Republicans who were ready to vote no went along with it. Similarly, Senator Cassidy of Louisiana, a doctor, after he said multiple times he had problems with Robert F. Kennedy because he thought that, this guy was an anti-vaxxer, this guy was not talking about real medical science. He had some problems with him. He got the Elon Musk call, and he also sold his soul to the devil and voted for RFK, and then everybody else fell into line. And so what you're seeing now in Iowa is Joni Ernst not running for re-election because the backlash on her was so significant. Hegseth is doing all of this because my Republican colleagues are co-collaborators and co-conspirators in this. We have to make it clear that they're the ones that are not willing to stop them. We could stop a lot of what Trump's doing if Congress would actually do its job and reclaim its power as a co-equal branch of government. And my Republican colleagues are simply not willing to do that. And we have to call them out on it.
A lot of people have talked about a national strike. I know you're talking about what you're able to do by shutting down the government. What do you think of the idea of a national strike and to respond to this?
Well, I think whatever Americans can do in a peaceful way that doesn't harm folks is expressing your First Amendment rights, which is what I wore the uniform for 23 years to protect and defend. Get out there and speak your mind. That is the most patriotic thing you can do as an American, is exercise your First Amendment rights. It's not about, yes, wearing the uniform is incredibly patriotic, and I'm proud that I did, but I did it so that people could get out there and speak truth to power.
Absolutely. And, I think we've become a bit complacent in terms of what we think of as our rights to citizenship, or what it means to be a citizen in this country. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm not talking about the people on this call, because clearly if you're on a Tuesday night here to listen to us, you are very engaged.
We are self-selecting.
But when I think about I think about the number of people that didn't vote in the last election. We saw this shift towards Trump, and the Republicans, swept both chambers. But a lot of people stayed home. And it's not enough for us to just talk to the people that we already agree with. We have to be uncomfortable, and we have to put ourselves into rooms of folks who may not be engaged at all. They might not see that either party, they might not think either party make a difference in their lives. They might not understand the difference. And they might not have the time and space to pay attention because they're just trying to put food on the table for their family. And so it isn't just enough to talk to ourselves and post on Facebook things that make us feel good and get the validation of, yes, people agree with me. We have to go into places that make us uncomfortable. And, Senator Duckworth is modeling that by going across state lines into Republican districts. We all need to take that on as citizens and have those tough conversations in loving and empathetic ways, but in ways that persuade, and not just talking to the people that already agree with us.
I want you to hold those thoughts, Janessa, because I want to get into a little bit more of that with you, but I know that Senator Duckworth needs to leave in about 5 minutes. So I'm going to do a little lightning round with you, Senator. I'd like to know how much damage you believe, blowing up 11 Venezuelan citizens in international waters has done to us as a country.
Significant damage on several levels. Basically, we've broken international law, but we've also, I think, more dangerously set a precedence for other people to do the same. So if we get away with doing this, there's nothing stopping the PRC from doing this, maybe against American vessels. So we are now setting the precedence, and not just doing it once, but now doing it twice. And so other nations will feel that they can get away with it as well. That, to me, is the most dangerous aspect of this. It's violating international law, but it's also saying to the rest of the world, hey, go ahead, you do the same. And basically eroding the international law of the seas, international recognition of international borders.
How do you reduce the political and personal threat that Republicans fear and feel so that they can actually fight for their constituents and not bow to this man?
They have to be more afraid of their constituents than they are of Donald Trump. They don't think that they think that Donald Trump will cause them to lose their jobs, not their constituents. And until they start to be more afraid of their constituents and Donald Trump, they will continue to do whatever Donald Trump tells them to do. And so this is where the power of the people comes forward, right? Everybody needs to come out and make it clear, write letters to call your friends, relatives, whoever you know in Republican districts. And if they complain about the fact that they can't get an appointment to the VA, say, well, what have you done? Did you write your congressman about it? We have to put the pressure on so that they will actually be answerable to their constituents. Because right now they assume that their constituents will vote for them. So as long as they think that their constituents will vote for them, they're gonna be more afraid of Donald Trump.
I know we're going to lose you in a minute, and I have one more short question before you leave. We got this question a couple of times, and I'm hoping you'll answer it. Are you a possible presidential candidate for 2028?
You know, I never, I have never said no when my nation has called me to serve. But I do think my better place to serve is here in the Senate. And I'm certainly not throwing my hat into the ring anytime soon. So I don't never say never. But you know, you can be a senator a lot longer than you can be president.
You have a lot of work to do. We like you where you are, but we'd like you anywhere. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Senator Duckworth, for all
Thank
of your
you.
time and all of your work for us.
Thank you,
Great to have you
everybody.
here.
Great to see you.
Good to
All right, Janessa, it's you and me, and there's a lot to talk about. You were talking about how we embolden and activate people to get out there and fight in their communities, in their, and I know that the focus of your organization has always been getting to empower veterans. So maybe you can tell me a little bit more about Vet Voice and how to engage these veterans and some of the issues that you guys are working on now.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think as I was saying earlier, it's really important for all of us. We have to lean in. And I know, look, we're all exhausted. Like the news cycle is exhausting. Every day there's a new set of fresh horrors, some crazy unconstitutional or illegal thing that they're doing to destroy the work of generations who have built amazing things in this country. And that's exhausting. And I personally sometimes want to just tune out and disassociate and not listen anymore. But I think that this is like the stress test, at least for in my lifetime, this is the stress test of our system of government. And if we're going to retain a democracy, we have to really treat it like the existential threat that it is and the constitutional crisis that we're living through now. And that means, digging in and working through that feeling of exhaustion. And I look to, generations ahead of me who, faced things that like hills that seemed impossible to climb. I think of the civil rights movement. I think of the LGBTQ community living through the AIDS crisis and like feeling these moments of despair and hopefully like this is never going to get better. And knowing that people have put in the work and put in a lot of work to do that. So, I think it's registering voters. I talked about that huge number of people who stayed home, who didn't vote. Almost a third of eligible Americans didn't vote in the last election. Talking about getting involved locally. Like there's so much good work that can be done. Organizing for your like school board elections, your local city councils, where a lot of things that really matter, including things like cooperation with ICE of your local law enforcement. Those things can really those elections can really make a difference.
And you see veterans having a specific role
Absolutely.
in organizing. And
I think that veterans, again, they're a group that is able to cross party lines and speak from a place where people trust veterans a little bit more than they do other people. I think part of that is when you serve in uniform, you serve with people from all walks of life. I served with people from every background. Some people weren't even U.S. citizens who were serving. They were earning their citizenship through their service. All kinds of political backgrounds, all kinds of stories, but you have a common cause, you have a common mission, and so you kind of put those things aside, and that is what our society ideally should look like. We all have our different ideologies and backgrounds and religions and beliefs, but at the end of the day, the experiment is the social contract, and I think we've just gotten so polarized and so far away. So I think veterans have a real responsibility to articulate that, and it means that they're very effective candidates also in more in purple places that are swing districts because people see them, I think, with a little bit more respect.
Do you think, I mean, I'm thinking about what's on, I think, everybody's mind, certainly this week, and we're changing direction a little bit, but really, as a society, we need to address how we cope with this increasing political violence and political rhetoric. And I'm kind of wondering if there are any lessons that you've learned from working with ex-military, with veterans, to help them adjust to civilian life that we can use on sort of de-radicalization in civilian society. Does
I
something like
think,
that, does it
yeah.
translate?
I mean, gosh, if I could, the biggest lesson I got from the military was that the experience of discomfort and working together towards a common cause breeds mutual respect, even if you disagree with each other. So if I
Mm,
could wave a magic wand today, Melissa, and have a national service mandate where every young person has to serve, whether that's in the military or as a firefighter or a forest ranger, but has to do something in service to their nation alongside people that they might not agree with or know or identify with. Man, I think that would go that would really do a lot. But in the absence of a magic wand, I think we all have to commit to again, moving ourselves into uncomfortable places, and engaging in dialogue, not digging our heels in, not practicing illiberal speech. And what I mean by that is, like, the whole point of the First Amendment is people can say things that I disagree with and not lose their life to political violence. Like, that is what a free society looks like. And I think the right is way more, in my opinion, they try to police speech in a way more violent and aggressive manner. But we all need to commit to this concept of liberalism, that we are allowed to speak our minds if we're not perpetuating violence, even if people disagree with us, and that it's okay to disagree, as long as we are still committed to the social contract of our democracy and our Bill of Rights. And that, I think, needs a lot of work and a lot of focus.
yeah, and probably a lot less social media, because that
Oh man,
certainly
yeah, if we could
emboldens
just flip the
people.
switch on
Right,
that,
that
yeah,
would be
I'm
great.
good with that too.
Yeah, I know you and I were talking before the start of the webinar about some of the work you are doing on dealing with uh, gun violence and veterans. I don't have the numbers at the tip of my fingertips right now, but the rate of veteran suicide is so much higher, and suicide by gun in the veteran community than in the general population. And I'd love to get your thoughts on what we can be doing now, certainly at such a charged time, but just in general, to address that, especially as benefits are going away, and as everything we've been talking about, the challenges, the increasing challenges that veterans are facing.
Yeah, I mean, we have a gun violence problem in this country, absolutely, and it is, there are a lot of factors that go into why people take their own lives or why they commit violence with a gun. But the number one thing that motivates it is the ease of access to weapons, and in particular to weapons of war that civilians can purchase with no background checks, no training, and do immense amounts of violence on their fellow citizens. And so one of our core programs that we've been working on for a number of years is to really use veterans' voices to say, look, there's a huge gulf between being able to responsibly own a firearm that you're trained to use, that you know how to store safely, and an 18-year-old being able to walk into a shop and buy a AK-47 or an M16 and take that home and then do whatever with it. And so we found that veterans' voices are very effective. Veterans are very effective messengers on this. As a Marine Corps officer, every year I was required to spend 2 weeks on a range to prove my proficiency with a rifle and a pistol. And we don't do anything near that level of requirement for a civilian who isn't trained.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you put your rifle in a locker, it gets locked up in an
And
armory.
it
You
locked
don't
up.
see it.
Right.
So just these arguments that, it's everybody's right to have access to these weapons of war and keep them in their homes. It just rings so hollow to me as someone who's served in uniform, served, overseas, had a weapon there, and not had access to it like on a whim. So I want to, point out that there is some positive, I think we're seeing some positive movement. In America today, it's pretty impossible to escape gun violence. Almost all of us have been touched by it in some form or fashion personally. And a bright spot of the last year was earlier this year, the governor of Colorado actually signed a bill into law that, for all intents and purposes, is an assault weapons ban, and was a real step forward, especially in Colorado, which is a state that has quite a robust gun culture. But it was veterans leading the charge on that fight, and we were really honored to work alongside groups like Everytown and Moms Demand Action to get that over the finish line.
We've worked with those groups here in Connecticut, Connecticut Against Gun Violence, and we've had great success. But it's a very different type of state. So I congratulate you heartily for that accomplishment. I know that extreme risk protection order laws are something where you would be certainly helpful, and I know that there are veterans groups that have come out in favor of them because it's a way to get a weapon away from someone, even temporarily, who poses a threat to themselves or others.
Absolutely. Yeah, we saw, I live in San Diego when I'm not in DC, and we have a extreme risk protection order law that was passed here a couple years ago. And since then, it's been activated a number of times. And what that means, if you're not familiar with the term, is someone who owns a weapon, if they are a danger to themselves or others, and a friend or family member fears that, they can actually call law enforcement. They can come in with a extreme risk protection order, confiscate the weapons temporarily while that person is evaluated. And it's prevented suicide, it's prevented domestic abuse and violence, and it's prevented crime. And I think more sensible laws like that. What is frustrating is that even laws that are common sense, that a majority of Americans agree we should pass, have not been passed at the federal level because Congress is bought. And frankly, until we solve that problem writ large, we're going to just continue to see members who refuse to do anything on behalf of their constituents because they'd rather get reelected, as Senator Duckworth said. So our job as citizens is to make them fear us and make them understand that they will be held accountable at the ballot box.
And that is probably the most important thing we can do, is get out there and vote. And if you're in a state where there are elections, I don't need to tell this crowd, this November, obviously get out there and vote. But obviously, the midterms are very, I think this is it. This is the last stand. Is your organization doing anything focused on the midterms?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the Vote Vets are the other side of our house. We have two priority elections right now this year. One is Abigail Spanberger's race for governor in Virginia. We've been with Abigail Spanberger since the very beginning of her career as a national security professional, former CIA officer. If you're not tracking that race, this is a first chance to show the Trump administration and the MAGA regime that we will fight back and we will win. Vote Vets is heavily involved in that race. We're also really involved in the New Jersey gubernatorial. So over there, you've got Mikey Sherrill, a helicopter pilot, military veteran, running, fantastic candidate, running for governor. These are the first two bellwether tests that we have. So we want to make sure that these women win and win big. So if you want to get involved with that, please get in touch and I'll be happy to share. And then in 2026, we've got a number of winnable seats. There's a bunch of frontline Republicans who aren't showing up to their town halls because they're getting yelled at by veterans. They're taking these horrible votes on policies they know are deeply unpopular, cutting rural hospitals, cutting Medicaid, gutting the VA, doing all these things. And so our job is to tell that story and make sure that our down ballot candidates from the Senate, Congress, all the way down to local school board, we endorse all the way down, are winning and are empowered. So please, sign up, get involved. We'd love to keep you apprised of some of the candidates that are out there that we think can really win and help us take back the House.
I'm hoping you'll come back and tell us more about it at the appropriate time. That would be a wonderful conversation. And I'm looking at the time and we're almost out of time. So I want to end with a question that we typically ask our guests, which I hope will leave us energized. And that is, what is giving you hope right now?
What's giving me hope is that, I think that we, for a second, like in January and February, I don't know if other people felt this, it just felt like there was no way out. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. And I think what I've seen is people standing up and fighting back. I mean, we're seeing more people in the streets in protest than America has ever seen before. We're seeing lawsuits that we're filing against the Trump administration were winning. We had a lawsuit against the firing of all those DOGed employees that is still being litigated, but those people have been rehired and reinstated in interim. That's 30,000 people whose jobs were returned. There was an attempt to privatize our public lands that was in the big, beautiful bill. There was a very interesting coalition of veterans, sportsmen, hunters, anglers, environmentalists, people who care about the climate that came together, kind of put down their sticks and swords and said, we're going to get together to say no privatization of our public lands. That language was stripped out of that bill. And that was a victory, even though Democrats had no real power in the House and Senate. So, the thing they want us to believe is that we don't have power, that our voices don't matter, and that it's it's useless to fight back. And that's just not the case. We have to keep
That's
fighting.
right.
We have to get louder, and we have to be willing to find new coalition members and bring them into the fight. And that requires us all, digging deep, finding empathy for our fellow humans, and finding places where we can connect and collaborate, even if we don't agree on everything.
Yeah, I think connection is key. Thank you so much, Janessa. I really appreciate that you were here with us. I appreciate that Senator Duckworth was here, and it was such a fascinating discussion. And thank all of you for joining us this evening. Follow us on social media and on Substack, and come back soon. Thank you again for being a part of our Big Tent. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.